Good morning, everybody. It is 10 a.m., and that means we're going to start this, after the opening remarks from Ivan, we're going to start this Gamelab. I'm very excited to be back here for yet another year. I'm also very excited to be doing this opening fireside chat with Maja Moldenhauer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We're excited to be here, and to Ivan for inviting us.
Yeah. Obviously, for those who don't quite know who you are, what you do, you are at StudioMDHR.
Yes?
Which this morning I found out is just short for Moldenhauer.
Yes.
So that's just...
We are a very small team based out of Canada, and half of us are Moldenhauers, so it only made sense.
But it started as just Moldenhauers. Right?
Yes, it did. It actually started with just two brothers, one based out of Ontario, one based out of Saskatchewan, and it was just a childhood, lifelong dream to create a video game. Like from 6, 7, 8 years old, hibernating in a basement on their systems and being like, one day I'm going to make games. And then you grow up and you're like, well, that's not really feasible. You start into different sectors and jobs. And it was back in and around 2010 when the indie scene really started to come to life. And I specifically remember going to watch Indie Game the movie. And John Blow and Fez and the Super Meat Boy guys and everything like that kind of opened our eyes to like, this is actually possible. You don't have to be a AAA title anymore to create a game. And so that was the spark that started it. Oh God, that sounds like a nightmare actually.
Yeah.
That's our trailer soundtrack. I've heard it more times than I wish to admit.
Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah, Indie Game the movie. So that was 2012?
Yeah, that was the spark. And beyond, like, aside from popular belief that we've been in development for 25 years, that was just the spark where we're like, okay, maybe we'll tinker with the idea of like what our first game would look like. So Chad and Jared, like I mentioned, they're brothers. They started brainstorming ideas, working very part-time, basically just talking at night after their day jobs, and on weekends concepting out what it might look like, but more focusing on the type of game that they wanted to make in the gameplay. And then back in 2014, it was right after Christmas of 2013, he came to me and was like, I think I want to sell my company. He had a small marketing company at the time, and I want to go full-time on making this video game. And I am such a good wife. I was like, sure, let's do it. And so a few months after that, I joined them, and we had a programmer out of Russia who was kind of helping us as well come up with a prototype. We put it up online, and just a very small trailer of what we were making, just to get kind of a taste test for if there was even somebody who would like the aesthetic, and that's when we got a call from Microsoft, and kind of things went from there. I know I just put a lot into one little sentence.
That's a lot that happened in the past paragraph.
Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah, let's back up a little bit. So they've been wanting to make a game since they were young.
Kids, oh yeah.
Yeah, and from what I understand, they were mostly inspired by these retro kind of hardcore action platform games.
Yes.
I think a lot of people in the indie scene probably recognize that inspiration, so they took it quite literal.
Yeah, no, we pay homage to quite a bit of the games that inspired us, and you'll see that throughout Cuphead.
So you also come from not traditionally a games background. You come from Biomedical Science?
Yeah, so I have, my career path kind of just goes in loops. So I have a degree in Biomedical Science, a minor in physics, and then after I realized that med school probably wasn't for me since I faint at the sight of blood, I went into IT, and then from there I made the transition to a bank in Canada. We have 5. So one of the top banks in Canada, I ran a small development team there. We created apps internally for the different lines of businesses. So it was stable. It was a good job. It was great pension, things like that. But the passion wasn't there. And I've always been very, very passionate about art. And so I've always been drawing on the side, always just very creative and artistic. And so that, I think that's part of the reason that when he came to me being like, let's make a video game, I was like, oh, I could probably be involved in this too.
Was that scary? Was that a scary moment where somebody says, okay, let's throw away everything we have. You throw away your job. I throw away my company. Let's go make
When
this
you put
game
it like
together.
that,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like the right answer should be yes. But to be perfectly honest, it wasn't. We, oftentimes people think that like, oh, you threw everything away. But throughout the different jobs and careers that you have, it's like this analogy I always use is like it's a toolbox. Everything that I've learned in IT, everything I learned in development services, just goes into the toolbox, and nobody can take that away from you. So I knew that if this didn't fly and nothing came to fruition and we failed miserably, I had created so many connections throughout my lifetime that I could easily be like, hey, Adrian, my old VP, can I get a job? And I could. And so the other thing that really propelled me and motivated me above everything was not wanting to be 50, 60, 70 years old and being like, what if? Yeah. That fear of resentment of like, what if I hadn't tried? What if I didn't do this? Surpassed everything else.
So I had a very similar experience. My wife was a satellite programmer that decided she got bored of that and then decided to make video games as well. And I asked her the same question at some point, and she gave the same answer. And one thing I wondered is, do you ever have, is the passion for art you have, the passion for this game you have, obviously is a strong factor in why you made that leap. Because I asked her, like, what if this hadn't worked out? Would you have looked back and thought, like, ooh, this was a bad choice? Or would you have looked back and been like, I did the right thing?
No, yeah, absolutely. So beyond popular belief, probably, the success of our game still comes as a shock to us. We have a really hard time comprehending how we got here, how I'm in Spain right now talking to you and people are here. It's just it's a surprise. So we didn't go into it with the expectation of any of this. We went into it just wanting to give it a try, give it a shot, doing something that we were passionate about. We're passionate about games, we're passionate about art, we're passionate about this industry, and like if it didn't work out, it didn't work out, and then we could say we tried, that was it. Let's go back to what worked.
So you started work on this around 2013-ish?
That's when, I would say 2014 was when the four of us were really kind of putting a lot more overtime into it. We still had our day jobs. I hadn't actually left my job. I was on mat leave at the time. I wasn't being paid though through StudioMDHR, so there's no conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was on mat leave at the time, started working with the guys halfway through 2014, and the scope of the game was very small. It was only 8 bosses, Mega Man style select screen, no overworlds, nothing that the game is that you see today. Yeah. It was never that. And then it was after, we got a pulse check from the community in that, oh, this game kind of looks cool. That we're like, oh, people are responding to it. Maybe let's make it a little bit more in depth. And so there were actually two moments in time that happened for it to get to the point that it is today.
So to back up a little, this project started gaining steam in 2014.
Yes, yeah.
It was picked up where was it picked up by Microsoft? They found it on a thread somewhere?
Yeah, I think it was NeoGAF at the time.
They found it on NeoGAF?
Or it was maybe our YouTube channel. No, I think it was we created a YouTube channel as our only video up there, and we got a call from someone in their business development team on Christmas Eve, and that is cemented in my brain as like the best call of all time. We were just floored. Chad is very like emotionally stable, so he's like, "This is pretty cool," and I'm freaking out around the house.
Okay.
So yeah, it was that phone call and them wanting to have a discussion in the new year about coming to the Xbox platform that we were just like, oh my God, this is such a dream come true.
So dream come true. What was because you're a small team at that point. You were 2, 3, 4 people. Four
Yes.
people. A programmer from Russia.
Yep.
The 2 brothers.
And myself.
And you.
Yep.
You get a call from Microsoft.
I don't think they knew that we were a team of 4, but given my background at the bank and in financial services, I was able to kind of inflate us a little bit. And I was like, oh, the team that's sitting right beside me.
Yeah. Yeah. We.
Yeah. No. So I think, or maybe I think they didn't know, but they probably fully knew and understood. So they took a risk on us for sure. They saw something there. They were very, very supportive of it. I think at that same time they were starting their ID at Xbox program, so they kind of pitched that program to us and how they support indies in the community and onboard them into the Xbox system. And we were like, this is perfect, because we had only intended on publishing to Steam, like on PC, and so this was just another channel for us to get the game out there.
Were there any large discussions that were had before this? Because that's a big decision. You're going to lock into console exclusivity. You're going to develop for a platform that I guess you have no experience with as a team. Now there's certainly certification, all these rules and all that. Like, was there like a conversation up front that was like?
They were, you know what? They were really supportive. We didn't even know what goes into the certification process until we went through the certification process. I'm not going to lie. To say that there's a handbook or we knew exactly what went into it or the timelines or the lead time that you have to have for a game, we learned a lot through this game. And so that toolbox I was talking about, there's a lot more that went into that after Cuphead. But they were very supportive. They, like I said, they had started that ID at Xbox division, so they had people, you know, on calls whenever we needed to help shepherd us through the whole process. I think they knew that we were transparent and candid in the fact that we're not gamers, or we're not developers. We hadn't developed a game before. This is our first one. So they were just really supportive with it and helped us. It wasn't really daunting. We didn't know. You know what I think helped us? We didn't know what was ahead. Yeah. So that blindness really was an asset.
I remember that feeling the first time we signed with a console. We're like, this can't be that hard.
Yeah.
And it was a little hard. Did you have at the time like because this is a young studio?
Yes.
Did you have like a support network of other developers, or did you go to events, or was it just literally you and Microsoft at that point?
It was us and Microsoft. We knew a lot of developers by being huge fans of different games and stuff like that. I have Mark Cerny in the corner of my eye, and I'm like sweating up here because he's one of them. And I mean, we knew of a lot of people, but we didn't network. We didn't have the connections. Nobody knew who we were. I'm pretty sure nobody still knows who we are because we don't go to a lot of events. But so we followed a lot of people, and Toronto actually has. So Chad and I are based out of Toronto. Has a very large video game scene. Despite popular belief, I think people always think it's like West Coast thing, but Toronto has a lot of companies that reached out to us after we were at like E3 or something like that, offering, you know, the support and being like, hey, we'll sit down, let's have coffee, let's go for dinner, and we can talk about our experience. So I'm hugely thankful to companies like Capybara, Nathan Vella from there. He was like instrumental in kind of helping make things easier.
He's instrumental in a lot of things.
Yeah.
He's, especially Toronto.
Yeah, everybody knows him.
Yeah. It's good. Toronto is a good base for that.
It is.
So you get this call from Microsoft. You decide, okay, this is a good idea. Let's go do this. Did anything change at that point? Was it more
scope
real?
Of the game.
Was it because you immediately got response, right? Like you start. Let's go for the trailer first for the reveal. How does a team of 4 prepare for E3, like the biggest games conference in the world?
Yeah, that. So remember how I said there were 2 moments in time that we were like, oh my God, this is real? That was the second. So having Microsoft say that we wanted to include a part of your game in our montage trailer was just like, I can't even articulate it yet. I feel like at a loss of of words for how that felt, because we would never, on our own, we would have never been able to do that and have that reach. So to be that early on in the game and to be able to put it out there, to get that pulse check from the community of like, okay, is there something here, is there not? So once we saw, message boards and our social channels light up after that, it was like a 4-second clip or 5 it was very, very short. We were astounded, and then so we went back to the drawing table and we're like, okay, wait, there are more than 10 people who might buy this game. And we always had that dream goal of what the game would look like, which is what you see and have played today. So we inched a little closer to that. Let's make an overworld. Let's put a little bit more money in this. Let's remortgage our home. Those kind of decisions.
The usual small choices in life. So at that point, because at that point the game was, you said like 8 bosses, boss rush mode, boss to boss to boss.
Yes.
The idea had always been a little bigger, but being...
Well, we were constrained with money. We didn't want to be living on the streets at the end of this if it didn't work out. So we were very conservative. A lot of times people romance it in these stories and being like, these 2 people made Cuphead and they sold their homes to make it. And it's like, nah, maybe not so much. Yeah. So it was incremental. There were steps, there were checkpoints along the way to make sure that this was a sound decision to expand it. And when we got to that point where we're like, okay, we need more funding, where do we have assets? And put those kind of on the line for it. It was actually at the second E3 when we went all in. And we're like, this is what it's going to look like. We did platforming stages. Yeah, it was when Chad and Jared were on stage.
Oh, yeah. At that point, you obviously had a pretty good idea of that the game had an audience, had a reach, had potential. Yeah. That very slow build of risk, effectively. Starting at it, you kept your jobs. You didn't just throw everything in. You slowly built a thing, tested it.
Yep.
It responded, you expanded.
Yes.
Was that a very intentional strategy, or was that just sort
of
like...
No, it wasn't. I wish that it was, so I could be like, see, I'm such a strategist. Yeah. It wasn't. It was, we really just, we were conservative, we were risk averse, believe it or not. And so we really waited to the moments before we had that conversation. It was not premeditated. And it was when the opportunity presented itself at that point, we were like, okay, let's take it a little farther. Mm-hmm. And then that's as far as we were going until something new happened, and let's take it a little farther now.
So okay, you're in the Microsoft presser, big E3 moment, even if it was a 4-second clip in the whole thing. I remember that 4-second clip. I think was anybody on Twitter that day watching E3? Do you remember that moment if you were there? I think most people remember that moment if you were watching that E3, because I think the entire internet did a what the holy I want to play that. Yeah. So I guess on your end, pretty much everything must have exploded.
Yeah, my brain included.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It was a big moment that day. Yeah.
So at this point, you are an artist on the theme at that point?
Yes.
You were doing the...
Yeah, I would. So when we started, Chad was... we wear many hats at the company. Obviously, we're very small. So Chad was like, okay, I'm going to be creative director. I'm going to animate everything. I'm going to ink it. I'm going to paint all the background, just a crazy amount of work. And so one of the things that, just given my past, I was like, why don't I help you with the art stuff? So I took some of that off of his plate, and then eventually we onboarded more animators and a background artist to kind of help alleviate things. So
traditionally in teams of 2 to 3, the kind of roles that you see is you have the creative director who protects the vision, you have somebody who can sort of design the game, and then you have people working on execution, artists, programmer. That sounds kind of like what the team was.
Yeah. By the end of it.
Yeah.
It was not until the last year and a half of development before we really beefed up. Even in the last stretch of the game, I think it was the last 8 months is when we sourced out quite a bit of QA and a lot of producing roles. We needed help with production and project management out to a company in Montreal. Montreal is a huge hub for things like that, and the communities were so responsive. They were so helpful. and they really saved us, helped take this to the end and finish line.
So you're an artist. This E3 thing happens. You now have the title of producer
Yes.
of the game, obviously. Was that the moment where you all looked at each other and went, "Ooh, we might need to scope this. We need
Yeah,
to control
Chad and
this."
Jared are really bad at timelines. If you haven't, if you couldn't tell, but I don't fault him for it. He's a very creative. He's a very, very creative guy, and you don't want to hinder creativity with a timeline. Thankfully, Microsoft was great with that kind of thing and giving us that creative freedom and saying, it's done when it's done. A bad game is bad forever. We hear that day in and day out. And so I just needed to put a little bit of boundary on that. It's like, here's our project plan. We need to stick to it. And then I'd always bake in contingencies. If he gave me okay, it's going to take us a week to do this, I'm like, okay, so 3 weeks.
Yeah. Multiply everything by 3. Yeah. So was there in your mind as producer, as somebody who has to keep these two boys in check?
Cowboys.
Was there a moment right after that E3 where they started talking about okay, maybe we need to let go of the restraints on this a little bit? Was it like a oh dear, or was it a yes? Or how did that process happen? How was that conversation?
Just more hours in the day. I don't think that a lot of those roles went to other people or anything like that. They really stayed in the weeds. There was no okay, well, we're going to take it up to a 10,000-foot level and hire a bunch of people underneath. They stayed fully involved. There were 18-hour days, 7 days a week. It was just nonstop, but never once did it feel like work. I will say that. I would wake up in the morning, kind of ship the kids off to where they needed to go, and we'd be running downstairs into our basement, excited for it. So it was never felt like work. But yeah, it was just more hours to be able to do it all.
Yeah. Do you think that? I mean, obviously, it never felt like work. It is work.
Oh yeah,
obviously.
it's a lot.
Was that stressful? Did you? Because obviously, this was a 4-year stretch, 3-year stretch.
Yeah.
Of that?
Yeah, I would say 3 or 4. 4 very part-time, 3 a little less, 2 full-time.
How do you keep a team, such a small team, through and such a personal team as well? Brothers, husband, wife, and a Russian programmer.
Who has gone at this point, and then we had Canada is so rich in developer programmers that we were able to find somebody local.
How do you keep a team that small working that hard under such pressure and stress? How do you make sure that just doesn't explode? Because I work with one other guy, and I don't even like him. And that's stressful. I don't know how to keep that friendship from disintegrating all the time. How do you keep everything around that?
Believe it or not, we were never. I mean, I may have had some stressful days, when I just had a stack of animations on my desk and I knew I had to get through it by the day or else the programmers didn't have things to integrate into the game. So there were days where I'm like, how am I going to get through this? Your wrist is just, you physically can't, you hit a threshold. But other than that, they were never really that stressed. It's just not in their DNA. It helps. Chad and Jared, if anyone's ever met them or seen them, are black and white. Total bipolar opposites, but they're the best of friends. And when they came to work together, it was magic. Obviously, that transcended throughout the team, right top down. They've always had such a positive attitude. They were never, dictators in the sense of we've got to get this done now, today. If somebody had a creative block or something like that, they would help them. And if they couldn't help them past that, they'd be like, take time, go take a day off, go take a couple days off, Very, very laid back. And so I think that sort of attitude really transcended, like I said, through the entire team, that everybody was very easygoing. This wasn't the end of the world. We had quite a bit on the line and invested personally, but it wouldn't have been fun if we were kind of giving marching orders and being do this now, do that. That would ruin it for us. So I think that's what helped keep us kind of easy and laid back.
With your house on the line
I know. It sounds like I'm lying.
No, I mean, especially in the process of a game, everything kind of like focuses on that.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think when you have a positive environment, coming from an environment where if an application goes down in the bank, that is bad. It's really bad because it affects millions of people. If we didn't finish a boss attack, it just wasn't the end of the world. And like I said, it was important to us to really love our job, be passionate about it, and it would make us miserable to be in an environment where people hated coming to work.
Yeah. So you have this game that has no expectations except for your own hopes. Then E3 happens, another world has expectations, and you decide to scope up.
Yes.
I think you communicated that at some point as
yes.
well.
Yeah.
E3, the next E3, I think.
Yes,
when they were on the stage.
I think that's when we introduced platforming stages, which was always a pipeline dream. But the focus was always on boss battles because they just loved encountering bosses in the games that they played. So let's make a boss rush game. So the platforming stages were integrated along with the shop to be able to accrue weapons and charms. We needed a vehicle to be able to get the money to be able to buy those. So it all kind of played in together.
So you announced a new thing that also got you announced the platforming and the overworld that also got a lot of response, but it also came with a lot of new expectations.
Yes.
There was no point in this process, it sounds like, where you as a team were ever too worried about that. You were just aiming at making this game in your head.
Yeah.
And the expectations would hopefully pan out.
It stems from what I said at the beginning in that we didn't do this. This sounds so cliche. We didn't do this for money. We didn't do this for being invited to conferences and this and that. We did this for the love of gaming, wanting to make a game that we, as gamers, grew up playing. And so whether the response was positive or negative really didn't change our thought process. There was no focus testing. I think one of the areas where people who were in the industry had said to us later, you got to let people play this game, and we kept it tight. We did not, we didn't have a lot of people come in to play test it. It was really just Chad and Jared knowing exactly what they wanted to make, and they didn't want to get distracted from that, which is probably not the best advice. You probably should let people play test your games, but I just want to kind of emphasize that laser vision focus. Know what you want. And stick to your guns. Don't be dissuaded or persuaded by other people.
Is there, because that obviously is another, that 2015, it feels like E3 2015, I think, when you announced that.
Yep.
That felt like another big moment in the game where you, instead of being a 4-second montage, you are now
on a
stage.
I know.
Telling people hey, this game is going to be cool.
Yes.
At that point, I assume Microsoft had figured out that this was a thing.
Yeah, I don't think we knew that though. I think that
you didn't.
No, we were just oh my God, why are they letting us do this?
So Microsoft clearly did at that point realize.
Probably knew what they were doing.
Was there a noticeable shift in how they supported? Was there more?
There was a lot more support. I think with the additional scope and having announced a timeline or a date then, they, again, never really pushed the, we need a hard date, you need to stick to it, where's your project plan, let's see your milestones, let's see prototypes and demos, and let's see that you have achieved what you were setting out to, and there was none of that. It was just, it was a lot more support in terms of, here's somebody, a dedicated relationship manager, here's a dedicated development person that if you have any questions, call them or email them. And they were just instrumental in those days where we're oh my, I don't know how to work this back end. What do you mean certification? We have to be certified? Yeah. Kidding. I knew that.
Was that feeling afterwards, obviously, again, a huge influx of support and people watching instead of looking for that one moment that everybody was talking about, this was the reveal of Cuphead. At that point, I guess internally, you must have realized that this was an important moment, or going to be an important moment.
Absolutely.
What were the weeks before that?
Stressed, on me. It's always me. I'm always a stress bag. Stress in terms of getting that trailer done to the specs and this and that. Surreal.
Yeah.
You know, never in a million years would we have had the money to have stage presence, have that kind of reach in that moment. So even still, like it's hard to really understand how everything kind of came together.
You say it was usually you who stressed. Do you think that's just your producer?
That's my nature. Yeah, and that's
your
probably
producer
why I'm such a great producer, because I bear the stress of everyone.
Yeah, I feel that's kind of
Everyone else is too laid back.
yeah. I think that's kind of the role of a producer, isn't it? To
Yeah.
sort of shield the creative
Yep.
team from
Absolutely.
the realities of the business, but
Yep.
then to also make sure that the creative team ends up working in
Yes.
tandem with this. Because Microsoft is not, it's not a small company. This is a
Yep.
giant machine
Yes.
of different elements.
Yeah, that's why it was only me ever on the phone calls. I
Yeah.
was like, you just keep working. I'll
Yeah.
take this call.
Yeah, you get the thing where it's like, okay, all of this needs to be slightly different. Here's like, you know what? I'll tell them my way. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Was that sounds like that fit pretty naturally for you? That was just a
It did. I'm a bossy person, so it did. It worked out well.
It worked out. So the you're now 2015, so you're now 2 years away from release-ish. Most things are locked in. The art style obviously came
Oh,
very
yeah.
early, and I think we can talk about that for an hour. But there's been
Yeah,
a lot
it's
said.
probably been talked about
yeah.
ad nauseum. Yeah, it came secondary though. A lot of people think the art style was first, but it came
Mechanics.
mechanics of the game, the type of gameplay was definitely first and foremost, and then art style was
Yeah.
like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, it was interesting because it's a game that is designed. The combat mechanics are so tightly designed that it had to
was
be
very
that first
important for us.
because
Yep.
you don't start with that animation and then end up making
Yes.
that game.
Yep.
You can start with the game and then add that
Yes.
animation. So now you're ramping up for release. You've been working on this for 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Your house is on the line. You have a family. You have 2 brothers.
Thanks for bringing me back to this time, Rami.
You're most welcome. At some point, you realized that this wasn't a project for 4 people anymore.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
You started to scope up a little. Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier is that a huge part of what MDHR is the culture.
Yes.
It's a laid back culture.
Yep.
It's creative. It's collaborative. When you start to look for people, what was your
Yeah, we, just like the type of game we wanted to make, had a very specific employee in mind. And so we had to go far and wide. We weren't constrained, so I'm not sure, some people might know, but we're a completely virtual office. We don't have a central office or rent any space or anything like that. We are based in Canada, but given the nature of the art style in the game, animators who still draw on paper are far and few between, so we had to kind of spread our wings a little bit, and we had to go all the way as far as like California to find some animators, to BC, to Ottawa, and so being virtual obviously helped enable us to do that rather than being constrained to just one demographic and only hiring within the Greater Toronto area. So that helped in finding the right person. So it was finding people who are passionate about what they did. So a lot of our animators, some of our animators don't play games at all, but they're like insanely talented animators. Conversely, you know, our programmers are huge into gaming. They were passionate about the type of games that we loved and that we were making, so that kind of came into play. So yeah, we had a type in mind, and it had to be conducive to the environment that we were in.
How did you check that? How did you check somebody is conducive? Just chatting? Just
Yeah, you
phone
get,
call?
you know, there's intuition. If something doesn't feel right, it's not going to be right. There was like a few phone calls. I shouldn't say like a lot of it was luck, but it kind of feels that way because there was not a lot of turnover. Anyone who came on board is a diehard kind of like MDHR person now. We got really lucky with the people that we found.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not hard, and especially in Toronto, we have, most of our people are from Toronto and Ontario. It's so rich there in terms of talent that you can't really go wrong. Like, there's a lot of talent there.
Well, you can't go wrong.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't, which that's good. It's hard. Hiring people is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
I found that it's one of the things that I stress about most.
Okay.
Probably in it's just how do I find somebody, and then I'm kind of taking a risk on behalf of their life a little by being like, hey, come join us on this silly.
That's a really good point. So the one thing that we made very clear to people was we have never made a game before. We have everything on the line, so you know that we're invested in this, and that we're not just going to abandon ship. I think a lot of people could see that dedication and passion, and so they trusted us. But at the same time, like you mentioned, like you have people's livelihoods, like they're going to quit their job to come work for you, and you better have work for them. You better have pay for them. So yeah, it can be daunting, but it's just as much of a risk on their behalf taking a chance on a game that has never published before. So we knew that there was something there if somebody wanted to come on before there was ever anything in that basket.
Was there at that point, because you grew the team because I guess it wasn't feasible anymore to get it done. You had a date out at that point as
we
well?
had a year. I think we had announced 2017.
Was that a good idea?
No.
Announcing a date? No. I think that's one of the general rules of the games industry is it is always bad to publish a date.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. This is, if any takeaway today, please take that.
Do not publish a date
No
until
dates.
you're very close to certification.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we learned through the whole process. In all honesty, we thought we were 100% going to hit that. There was no chance we weren't. And the reason why we didn't quite simply boiled down to the fact that you can't put a stamp on creativity sometimes. If there was a boss or an enemy or something that wasn't right, we never once settled. There was never like, oh God, like we have to stick to the project plan, whatever, just put them in there. It was no, scrap it, do it again. It's not, and we said it a lot more eloquently than that.
No, but it's true. It's also why the producer role in a project like this is just interesting to me, because clearly this is a passion creative project.
Yep.
Trying to work under this massive company full of gears and basically a machine, and that's not a bad thing because that's exactly what they're
meant to do.
Yeah,
that's what we want them to do. Exactly.
Is be that machine and have that reach and have the platform and the device. But that interfacing must have been interesting. We're gonna announce 2017.
Yeah.
Except for there's 2 bosses at this point, and we don't really like the animation.
There was
so
more than that, thank God.
we're gonna redo all the animation on ones only.
No. There was more than that. We knew the scope. We thought we were gonna make it, except it was just again not wanting to settle. So when it came to doing a lot of the platforming stages, instead of reusing screens and backgrounds, so every background in the game is custom to its scene. There's no reuse. In fact, I think this is one of the stats I had dropped before, so apologies if you've heard it, but in the Grim Matchstick phase, you know how when it starts raining with the dragon, each raindrop is individually drawn, because God forbid we reused a raindrop. And I think when I was inking them, I counted, and there was 6,000 for that phase. And so it was just, you can't put a timestamp on something like that. It was when you imported it into the game and you play tested it, Chad would be like, it doesn't look right. Did you know that Ariel's bubbles underwater were unique every single time? They never reused a bubble, and I was like, oh my God.
Wow. Yeah.
So that it's frustrating, but that's really what the delay was, and not settling. And once you could see it on screen, if it wasn't good enough, you went back and you kept at it.
Was there any point where you, as producer, had a moment where you're like, "Oh, come on, listen,
Oh, God.
I just had this phone call."
Every day.
All right.
But what really helped me, and I learned this very early on, I think I mentioned even early in this session, was that when we first were approached by Microsoft, you try to act like you're bigger than you are, and you're like, oh, yes, let me transfer you to that person. And meanwhile, you're like, Chad, get on the phone.
Other ear, just like, yes,
pick
hello.
up the other handset.
Yeah.
They knew we were 3 people. There was no like faking it. I thought we were faking it. I thought we were doing a great job at that. They knew. They took the risk on us. They trusted us. And so very early on, I learned be transparent, fully transparent. So it was actually my idea to be on the phone with our account manager every other week in the last year of production and be giving him updates as we go on. And again, very transparent. Hey, we meant to hit this milestone last week. Here's why we didn't. And the minute that you start pretending that you're farther than you are, or yeah, things are going great, but you have these bugs that you can't remediate, it is an exponentially sinking ship. And so we're very honest, very transparent. Like, we have some bugs, we can't figure it out. Here's a resource. Yeah. And then we nipped it. Like, it was.
Yeah. This transparency, I also saw in the way you all responded to a bunch of the less fun moments, I guess, of development. You had a number of smaller and bigger controversies while the game was coming out about historical context, about the difficulty of the tutorial.
Yep.
How is being this small team dealing with this game and all of this, and then suddenly you realize, like, oh, there might be things that will go bad? Because I guess at most of the time this was going pretty smoothly. It sounded like you were having a terrifying time of your life.
Yes.
And now suddenly there's people who don't like it.
Yeah.
Or like vocally don't like it.
So part of being a Moldenhauer is they thrive on debate. I remember my first, so I'm not Moldenhauer by blood, I'm married into it. So obviously a very different person. I remember my first family dinner. There was a debate at the dinner table, and they were just going at it. And I remember being like, I was like, I gotta use the ladies' room. And I like went in there and I was crying. I was like, everyone's arguing. Why is everyone fighting? I just come from a very different family who's very kind of like, put your fork here, your knife here. And so they just thrive on debate. They thrive on controversy. They will even take a different side just to argue it and debate it. So it's a very healthy relationship that they have with that, and that transcended downwards. So the minute anything happened that wasn't this perfect, messaging or in the comments, or like you mentioned, some of those controversies, it just kind of rolled off our shoulders. We were that laser vision focus we never got distracted by it. It was just like, oh yeah, this is happening, back to work. It wasn't intentionally that we're not going to read comments. We just didn't have time. We didn't have time to read comments. We didn't have time to pay attention to these kinds of things. Yeah. We knew what kind of game we were making. We knew what we wanted to make, and we stuck with it. And nothing that was happening outside of our bubble was going to change things like that. We had pure good intentions. We wanted to just make a game that people had fun with. We wanted to bring our childhood experiences to life, and there was nothing bad about what we had intended to do. So we didn't feel bad about it.
Yeah. There was just reading that. Do you remember reading the first time these controversies, reading them and being like, okay?
Sometimes, as much as you say you don't pay attention to them, they crosses your Twitter feed or your whatever. And it felt, I want to say like we were daunted by it, or, you get kind of like sidetracked, but we really weren't. Like, we had the support of so many communities and so many people that were like, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like your game. And in fact, it was those people and any kind of, people were saying like, we don't like this game because, that helped us. They were like, okay, well, wait a second. Is there something we could do different because of this? And if it wasn't, I'm not negating the validity of some statements and things like that, but we're like, should we revisit this? No, it's good. Okay. Or should we revisit this? Yeah, that makes sense. That's a better idea. Let's go with it. So we welcomed it. It was, nothing ever really made us sad.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, dealing with feedback is a huge part of.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is, because I've seen people go fully off track from it. And the only advice I can give is to be confident in what you're doing.
But also clearly make a consideration of, does this fit in what we're trying to make?
And I think another really big thing is understanding, and this is the beauty of it, and the beauty of, so in Canada, it's a very multicultural environment, very diverse. a lot of strong opposing opinions and this and that, and we work together with that to create something that is like that a lot of people can enjoy rather than just one demographic. And so maybe that helped, but be open and positive to it. Like the negative comments, let it roll off your shoulder. If it's something that might hurt your feelings or something like that, there's always going to be that like kind of troll or something like that.
Yeah.
But also welcome them sometimes.
Yeah. So this is all of these happen sort of towards the later stage of development. So I guess here are the last few months of Cuphead development. Certification, all that happens, all that rolls over you. You managed to finish this game, which is an incredible, like that's a miracle.
Yeah, it was.
You look at that and you think, there's no way anybody's going to finish that. And then somebody tells you the raindrops are unique. And you're like, what did you all do?
Yeah, I know. It seems kind of like a nightmare now.
Yeah. So it came out.
Yes.
And then it didn't just come out. It went platinum in like...
10 days, I think.
Yeah, 1 million.
Yeah.
1 million sales.
I know. Trying not to re-explode my brain, I just kind of picked up the pieces. I will tell you our lifetime stretch goal for the game was around, and even this number seemed like, oh, don't get ahead of yourself, yeah. 250,000. Mm-hmm. So to see our first day sales, we had actually, Microsoft was hosting a launch party for us in California, so we flew out there the day that we launched. And so we were offline for a little bit. We got to the hotel, logged in, checked some of the live Steam numbers and stuff like that, and just we thought somebody might have been hacked in and was like,
it's a bug.
Yeah,
clearly a bug.
This is clearly a bug. Yeah,
that
but
last zero. Is
crazy.
Not,
Absolutely crazy. It still feels surreal.
Yeah. So now you could keep the house.
We kept the house.
You kept the house.
Yes.
Is there? Because like obviously the story of Cuphead becomes one of working together with a small team of people, chasing dreams, taking risks, taking smart risks, starting to fit into this big industry of people, of existing structures, of companies, standing out in a world like that, but then also of figuring out what your place is in this industry.
Yeah.
And what if you were to summarize this story of Cuphead into a lesson that you learned, not a lesson per se for everybody, but just a lesson that you learned that you think is relevant to making games?
That's a great question. God, it's really hard to even answer that because I don't know if we do know our place yet. We're in a space right now that we didn't even know how. I had no idea the communities that are out there. Mm-hmm. All the different conferences, all these different shows. We've been very isolated from them, and so we're really learning about them now. And then I still, to this day, if I see someone wearing a Cuphead shirt, like we'll freak out. And I'm like, you've heard of Cuphead? Like so excited. I'm like chasing them down the street. But it's really, passion drives a lot of things to the right place. Whether you get to where you think you're going or you get somewhere else, it will be the right place if it's through a passionate vehicle. Like you really have to love what you're doing. You have to be confident about it. You have to know or think you know where you want to go. Stay on track, and it will all work out.
So if you give that advice, this is a question I ask of a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Like, given that advice, is there anything you want to tell people as like a but this, like follow your passions? Is there?
Be realistic and do it for the right reasons. So when I see people being like, or meet people being like, I'm gonna make an app or a game because I heard that people who make apps are like they get rich or they're like they make so much money off of it. That's not the right reason. Do it because you love doing it, not for fame, not for money, not for anything like that. Obviously, it's an asset because it helps you continue doing it. I'm not denying that, but do it for the right reasons.
I think that's a really good wrap for
Yeah, I know
the
that
story
sounds
of
so
Cuphead.
cliche, but
But hey, no, it's a cliche because it's true, and that's I
Yeah.
think that's important. Like I think for a lot of studios that are successful, or that have had this like weird mind, but we had it with Ridiculous Fishing, where at no part in development was we're going to be rich at the end
Yeah.
of this was a consideration.
yes,
But we wanted to make a really good fishing game about fishing with machine guns.
Yeah.
That was sort of our
yeah, perfect.
yeah. I think what we're going to do is we're going to open up the room for some questions. Are you okay with
Yeah,
that?
of course.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So if anybody has any questions, I don't know, will there be a microphone? There will be microphones. Perfect. Just
I
raise
see
your
one
hand.
just right here.
I'll let you pick the. I'll let you point
Yeah.
out the
Sure.
questions. Just raise your hand high because we don't have light in our face, so we don't actually see you.
Hello. Oh, sorry, I don't think your mic's on.
We'll repeat the question.
Oh, is there an on
Hello?
switch? There.
Yeah.
We go.
There we go.
It's probably a difficult question because, what was the most difficult thing about developing a game like Cuphead?
The mechanics of it and making sure that it plays the way that it plays. That was the one thing that did take quite a bit of time, art aside and creativity and blah, blah, blah. But we're talking very minute changes to the mechanics and the code to make something feel a certain way. The physics of it just had to be conditioned thoroughly for it to feel right. So that was, it's for any programmers who might be in the room, you obviously know how just one small variable can make a whole lot of a difference. So that was hard to find those variables for sure.
Was there? Did you? Because you also were stuck with a very specific animation style that
Yep.
was stuck to obviously like traditional
Yep.
animation. Those conflicts, how do?
Yeah, it wasn't really, we just, we animated on the ones at 24 frames a second, so we had a lot of flexibility with that. If you animate on the twos, there's a lot less you can do with
Yeah.
it, so we were good, we knew we were good with the animation fitting the gameplay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Can you speak, please, to the price point of the game? How did you come up with the price point? Is it your decision ultimately, or Microsoft decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was our decision by a far stretch because we had a lot of pressure from outside, people that we looked up to, outside sources, in making it a much higher price point, given the work effort that went into it, the cost of making the game ultimately. But we, as indies, having never made a game before, knew that we wanted to keep it lower. There was no chance we were going to sell this thing at $32.99 or $29.99 as our first game. And just, yeah, it was part of being indie. It was really important to us that it was going to be $19.99, and we stuck to that. There was not even $1 more we were going to go.
Did you also have that thing where you just kind of like, when you were thinking of the price, you just kind of set a price and then went like, that's too high.
Yep.
Like 23 too high, 17 too low. Like no.
No, it wasn't.
Was it just immediately 20?
It probably, no, it was $19.99 from the get-go. Maybe lower at some points, and then we probably came up $1 or $2, but not much lower than that. And again, we were never even going to entertain anything higher than that as our first game.
So it's funny. People think there's a lot of thinking behind the price, but I think it's a lot of gut. It's a lot of gut feel most of the
Yes,
time. Yeah. Yes.
for real. There really wasn't like, okay, where are we going to hit these sales and these margins if there was no back end calculations of any nature.
Any other question? Oh, move. Is there another question? There's some questions there. This side, if this is like a contest between questions on this side and that
just gotta
side,
yell.
you have to like step it up because there's 3 on that side.
Do you think is possible with the success of the game that maybe Walt Disney think again that hand drawing animation is cool?
Yes, because hand drawn animation is cool. Yeah, but there's been a huge resurgence of it that we as huge fans of hand-drawn animation are like so proud about in terms of being like, oh my God, did we reignite a little bit of this? Most recently at E3, we got the attention of James Baxter, who's one of the OG kind of animators over at Disney who did like Ariel and Beauty and the Beast and things like that. So for him to be like, hey, call me, it's just like, what? Yeah. And yeah, hopefully it helps drive a lot more attention towards it. I think if there are any artists in the room or things like that, always going back to basics is going to be helpful. Even if you end up always doing things digitally, doing things raw and basic will increase and improve the talent and how you do things. So hopefully it helps bring it even greater attention to it.
I guess your studio is now also kind of built around that specific skill set. So
yeah.
It's probably good.
Yeah, no, we're going to stick with that for the next little while, and yeah, we love it. We're gonna keep doing it.
You have an expansion for the game coming out.
Yes, the Last Delicious Course is coming out next year. Probably shouldn't have set a date.
It's coming out at some point in the future, and it will feature 6,000 unique hand-drawn somethings.
And it will feature a third playable character, Chalice, our heroine. So yeah, we're excited.
Shall we take one or two more?
Yeah, of course.
Two more? Perfect. Two more. Did this side ask any questions? There's one question on this side, one question on that side.
Okay, let's go.
After your first success, would you like to repeat with a similar project, like a new IP or something?
And do you have a launch date?
Yes.
Please.
In a price point, in art style.
Yeah.
We are not going away anytime soon. We love what we do. We now have the means to do it freely. So we're not going away anytime soon. I unfortunately, aside from the deals, there are many, many things in the cogs going and that we're talking about and working on, but unfortunately, all I'm allowed to talk about today is DLC and Cuphead. Or else I'm not allowed back home.
As more of a process question, when this StudioMDHR started, it was clear where you wanted to go.
Yes.
This is the first time probably in the studio's history where it's a question mark, or there is a question mark.
There isn't a question mark. We know
We'll leave it at
we
that.
know what it is. I'm just
not
allowed to. Yeah.
Perfect. That's fun. That must be real nice. When we were going to do our second game, we were like, we don't know what to do, and everybody liked our first game. Help.
I'm sure we'll get to that point, but I mean, think about 2 decades worth of ideas going through your head from your childhood to now, and being like, oh my God, it'd be cool to make this kind of game, or this, or this, or this. So we're just
but
going down that list.
if I had 20 years of ideas with my younger brother and we finished one and it was a huge success, we'd probably end up fighting over which of those 20 years of ideas would
I know
be.
this is where Chad and Jared are very weird in that they are like their brains are just interconnected and
Nice.
yeah.
That helps.
So I want to ask about the sound and the music. Did you guys had already like a very clear vision on that, or did you iterate over the development that maybe you were going to this kind of music, or you just wanted this jazzy big band kind of?
Yeah. So first came gameplay idea and knew exactly what kind of game we wanted to make and the mechanics and physics of it. Second came art style. And then we were like, well, if we're doing an aesthetic from the 1930s, the soundtrack has to match that. So it's very big band jazz music. We lied to a childhood friend who's a percussionist for the National Ballet of Canada and said, it's only a couple songs he had never composed before. And then we just added a song every other week. We're like, make just one more. Get just one more. Until we have nearly 3 hours of custom composed big band jazz music using a 40-piece ragtime ensemble.
Yeah,
So
it sounds great, by the way.
yeah, no, we're very, very proud of it. Chris Madigan is the composer. We luckily struck out that we consider him an honorary Moldenhauer. We've known him for life. Phenomenal ear for music. He's really, really talented. And we're very happy with it.
Did music come early in the process, or was that?
It did. We've been working on it for quite a long time. So as the iterations of the game were coming out, we have this many bosses, we need this many songs. As every time we added a boss or an island, we were like, we need another song. We need another song. So luckily there was no throwaway. He kind of nailed it right out of the park with every song. Maybe there's a few that were left on the editing floor and cutting room floor, but no, it kind of all came together. We knew what we wanted, and he knew what we wanted, and it worked. Serendipity.
That sounds perfect. Anyway, I think that's it for our time. So, Maja, thank you so much
Thank you
for your
guys
time
for
and your
coming.
knowledge.
Thanks a lot.
And
Hi. Yeah, just a very quick thing, just a reminder that if you guys want to speak with Maja a little bit more and you want her to share a little bit more of her work, she's going to be having like a Q&A session today at 3 p.m. in one of the rooms located in the hall. So you're free to join that session hosted by the Canadian government, and you can probably talk with her for a long time.
Come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, guys.
Perfect. Sí.
wow.
Just